shots came in a little off target.
Yeah, they did, didn't they? Alright, so you probably clicked on this video after looking at the title and thinking that this has to be some form of clickbait. I mean, how could it not be, right? Rise of the Resistance is overrated? Isn't this one of the most ambitious rides to come out of Disney? Yet, I don't really find it to be that interesting, and a while back in another video, I did make the claim that I found this ride to be quite overrated. Since then, people have asked me for my more in-depth thoughts on why that was the case, so I figured that it might make for an interesting video. I do truly believe that this attraction just isn't as good as everyone proclaims it to be. It's not really doing much that's particularly innovative, and if you removed all the pre-shows, you would be left with a pretty mediocre experience that doesn't really stand on its own. I always hear people claim, oh, it's not a ride, it's an experience. But what makes it an experience? Having multiple pre-shows? That's not exactly unique to Disney, and follows that trend of allowing Universal to do their homework for them, then copying it and taking all the credit through their own self-congratulatory marketing. This isn't to say that Rise of the Resistance is a bad attraction. In fact, I would consider it to be decent. However, today I would like to produce a bit of a shorter video, offering a bit of perspective as to why Rise of the Resistance is grossly, annoyingly overrated, and is instead just more serviceable, mediocre Disney fare. Let's first start off with the experience aspect of the attraction. If you know anything about Galaxy's Edge, and if you're watching this video, I assume you do, you'll know that the land was developed to be immersive. You're visiting the outer rim world of Batuu, made up mostly of shops and food eateries. Smuggler's Run will seamlessly transition you into flying the Millennium Falcon and stealing coaxium. On the other hand, you can wander to the outskirts of the town where you'll find the Resistance hiding in the forest, and this is where your journey will begin. This is something that no one really speaks about, but the majority of the queue for the attraction is actually rather weak. You'll start off with a small outdoor portion, moving into some caves and behind a waterfall. As you go further, you'll start to see hallways dug out by the Resistance, and as you continue, you'll notice more and more equipment. The idea behind this seems to be that you're traveling through a Resistance outpost, and that the different rooms you see are where equipment is stored or planning is done. However, for attempting to immerse you into a Resistance base, its small, cramped hallways, using racks of equipment as switchbacks, just isn't very immersive. The design doesn't make sense at all for a Resistance base, because it's still clearly just a queue. You might counter that by saying that it's impossible to do otherwise, yet the Secret Life of Pets attraction at Universal Hollywood proves that to be wrong. It cleverly uses apartment space furnishings to create switchbacks in a well-defined queue that still manages to feel organic, as if you're actually wandering through people's apartments. So, in the experience aspect, the majority of the indoor queue for Rise is serviceable, but somehow seems like an oversight when the rest of the attraction is trying so hard to immerse you into the overall narrative. Finally though, you'll reach the point where you encounter your first pre-show, introducing you to BB-8 rolling around above, which I think is where most people's memory starts for the attraction. You'll of course receive a transmission from Rey, who will inform you that the Resistance has infiltrated a Star Destroyer that's on its way to Batuu, and that you'll need to immediately evac. She will then hand it off to Lieutenant Beck, who will then inform you that you'll be boarding a transport ship with an X-Wing escort to get off planet. As the doors open, you'll step outside and see Poe's X-Wing, as you then wait to board your transport ship and cast members hurry you inside. Once you'll board, you'll find this to be a pretty interesting space, utilizing animatronics to portray Lieutenant Beck and Nien Nunb as the pilot. Admittedly, this second pre-show is the most interesting portion of the attraction for me. As the ship takes off, the compartment you're in rotates on a carousel, which you can feel as the scene plays out, allowing motion as a sensory effect to make it feel as if you're really traveling through space, before then being captured by the First Order. To the surprise of most guests, once you're captured, the doors through which you entered will reopen, but now you'll actually be in a different physical space on the Star Destroyer. I know that the point of the video is to highlight how overrated the attraction is, but this particular scene is actually quite impactful because it's so unexpected. Once you're actually inside the Star Destroyer though, you'll simply just reform into another line to experience yet another pre-show. You'll be lined up and sent into interrogation cells, where you'll encounter Kylo Ren and General Hux, who will then attempt to interrogate you. However, they will be called to the bridge, and as they leave, the wall will be spliced open where Resistance fighters hurry you onto prisoner transports, which is where the ride portion begins. Before we speak about that though, I want to offer commentary on the attraction up to this point. What so thoroughly annoys me is how people treat the pre-shows as some revolutionary aspect that hasn't been done elsewhere. Obviously, pre-shows aren't anything new, and adding moving components to them started with the Haunted Mansion elevator all the way back in 1969. However, Rise of the Resistance didn't pioneer the concept of using multiple pre-shows to immerse and transport guests into a different space. 5 years prior, Harry Potter and the Escape from Gringotts had already managed to do this, first recreating the bank lobby on magnificent scale, and then as you move further into the bank, you'll eventually enter the first pre-show, which takes place in Bill Weasley's office. Here, you will encounter the Goblin Blordak and Bill Weasley himself, as they explain that you'll be taking a lift underground to the Gringotts vaults. Once guests exit the pre-show, they'll find themselves in an elevator lobby where a painting of a goblin explains much of the same, and provides themed safety instructions to prepare you for your journey. Finally, the doors will open, where guests will step onto a bouncing platform that simulates traveling miles underground, before then being let out into the cold, damp caves of the vaults. To Disney's credit, they do provide a few animatronics during their pre-shows, and the carousel that moves the ship takes things a bit farther than the moving elevator lift, but the idea of multiple pre-shows to immerse visitors was clearly lifted from Gringotts. That's a large reason for why people's hyperbolic praise for Rise annoys me so often. It's certainly cool, but people treat it as some unique signature of Disney quality when it's very clearly inspired by a Universal attraction. If you mix this in with the rather underwhelming queue, I can't help but completely dismiss the opinions of people who constantly parrot that this ride is an experience, again, as if Universal hadn't already pioneered the concept. However, the comparison to Gringotts doesn't stop there, because I definitely perceive the ride portions as being rather equivalent experiences as well. Coming out of the interrogation room and boarding the vehicle, the Resistance will now attempt to get you off ship without being noticed by the First Order. You'll first encounter other prisoner transports, which are just the new vehicles returning to the station for the next set of people ready to board. Tying it into the story of narrowly escaping them is actually quite clever. You'll then go down a hallway, just escaping the notice of a probe droid. However, you'll finally encounter some stormtroopers who will shoot at you as you escape. Next, you'll enter a room where you encounter stormtroopers who will shoot at you as you escape. Next, you take an elevator up to a new level where you encounter stormtroopers who will shoot at you as you escape. Next, you will somehow make it to the bridge where you encounter General Hux and Kylo Ren, who will then turn and attempt to pursue you as you escape. I think you know how the rest of the ride plays out from here. To be fair, the ride is actually pretty fun, but I'm oversimplifying its story beats to make the point that it's just encounter after encounter, and here's where the comparison to Gringotts comes back in. For a period of time, from around 2010 to 2018, Universal continued premiering formulaic, screen-based attractions that put riders into scenarios where something would go wrong, and then they would go and experience scene after scene of chaos happening to them. Again, this can still make for fun attractions, but it leads to a distinct issue. First is that by not allowing riders to really take in what's happening through all of the chaos, any single ride experience can blend together, with riders not really remembering any distinct scenes because of the sensory overload. The screen-based nature of these rides, foregoing physical environments in favor of action, results in this as well. Compare this to slower moving attractions using physical sets, creating distinct scenes that leave an impact on riders, such as Pirates of the Caribbean or the Haunted Mansion. Even Universal seems to have recognized that they were missing this aspect, as their new Jurassic World re-theme in Hollywood continues the excellence of the original Jurassic Park ride, and The Secret Life of Pets follows this as well. From my observation, the rides that leave the most impact are those that allow you to really take in the atmosphere, populating their scenes with distinct moments that stand out from one another, and often using physical environments. Gringotts is definitely not one of these rides, throwing you into a lot of chaos with a lot of scenes blending together. Rise of the Resistance is very much the same, using different projection methods, but still being mostly a screen-based experience other than the 6 animatronics found in the ride. To me, while I applaud the attraction for building larger sets than what you'll find in Universal's rides, you're still just running around empty hallways, experiencing action mostly through projections. It relies far too heavily on the setup of the pre-shows, and as an actual attraction experience by itself, is rather mediocre. In the era of social distancing, Gringotts removed its pre-shows, just having its guests walk directly through the lift. Having experienced it like this, I can personally attest that without the setup, Gringotts feels like a much weaker experience because its ride portion is also just generally mediocre without the additional context. I think that if people could experience the actual ride portion of Rise of the Resistance without the pre-shows, they would have a very different opinion. This isn't to say that pre-shows are inherently bad, but if you removed them, people would realize that the ride is just more mediocrity, something more akin to Gringotts. With this being said though, the comparisons of the two rides don't stop there. What makes them stand out is the novelty elements that they use to impress riders. For example, Gringotts starts with a track that dislodges and faces you almost straight down, holding you before dropping into the pit below. Rise of the Resistance does something similar, first taking you up those elevators in the hangar scene, and then doing something similar, but as a motion simulator, with a drop to simulate the escape pod sequence. Yes, these are fun novelties, but as with the pre-shows, people continue to praise them as innovative, never-before-seen elements, when that's just simply not true. In fact, having a trackless ride vehicle move in and out of an elevator has been happening since 1994 with the Tower of Terror. Yeah, the technology is different and it doesn't happen as quickly, but it's not a new concept despite people often treating it as such. The same applies with the escape pod sequence as well, which is definitely more advanced because it does simulate additional movement, but it also just tends to blend in with the other action of the ride, resulting in it being a bit more forgettable than it should be. Perhaps you may disagree, but I personally believe that my comparisons between Rise and Gringotts is actually pretty apt. They're both fun rides, but are generally about the equivalent quality of experience. Maybe I've convinced you to see things my way, or perhaps not, but I have some additional criticisms that you may not have thought about either. The second video I ever produced on this channel is a more in-depth look at Disney's underwhelming design choices for their trackless dark rides. There, one aspect that I really tried to emphasize was how much of a mistake it was to use these vehicles, yet still design linear ride paths. Minnie and Mickey's Runaway Railway is the worst offender of this, and Rise of the Resistance suffers from this issue as well. Let me show you some quick examples that really exemplify how creatively bankrupt Disney's Imagineers were here. SeaWorld's Antarctica Empire of the Penguin, while not a great ride, did use its trackless vehicles more creatively. The guests were put into the role of a penguin named Puck, and the vehicles themselves would portray them dancing around on the ice and interacting with the environment. Being located in a building with a small footprint, the vehicles themselves would also backtrack, extending the ride time in a clever way. Another example would be the Enchanted Tale of Beauty and the Beast at Tokyo Disneyland. For those new to the world of theme parks, I wouldn't consider this to be a Disney ride because the Japanese parks are run by the Oriental Land Company, only licensing the Disney brand and making the majority of creative decisions themselves. Here, the trackless vehicles spend a lot of time in each individual room, twisting, turning, and dancing as the musical numbers from the film play out, each scene continuing to evolve. This is not only another great use of space made possible through trackless vehicles, but it allows the music to really express itself and play out as intended. Contrast this with the small, unmeaningful snippets that you might find with something such as Journey of the Little Mermaid, where the constantly moving Omnimover system is working against the music, only taking small segments and putting them on a loop. Another interesting use of trackless vehicles is with Popcorn Revenge at Wallaby, Belgium. This attraction is a little bit different, working as a competitive arcade shooter, showing how versatile trackless technology can be. As with the other examples, the trackless vehicles allow this ride to sit in a relatively small footprint, bringing you in and out of a central hub and into different theaters where you can play different games. One final example is going to be Symbolica, located at Efteling. Like slower moving attractions based around atmosphere and well thought out physical scenes as mentioned earlier, Symbolica manages to be just that. It takes its time, allowing you to really take in the fantastical elements and details of its scenes. What's also interesting is that certain scenes are unique to which themed vehicle you choose, which also happens to be interactive with control panels in front of the riders. In my opinion, Rise of the Resistance just feels like a fast-paced, linear experience in comparison. It's certainly true that the trackless vehicles lend themselves to the immersion aspect of the ride, but tracked vehicles would have probably worked just as well as long as the track was hidden from guest sightlines. Moving away from the vehicles themselves, but to yet again compare Rise with another attraction, Remy's Ratatouille Adventure really stands out to me through its clever use of sensory elements. I made this point previously in another video as well, but sensory elements have a huge impact on allowing this ride to be memorable. Whether it be the heat under the stove, the various spritz effects getting the riders wet, or certain smells such as oranges in the pantry or the scent of fresh bread in the finale, the ride really does allow you to feel as if you have entered the intimate world of the film. I suppose it's not necessary, but certain elements such as heat from Kylo Ren's lightsaber, or a lush, earthy scent when you return to Batuu, would go a long way in helping the ride experience stand out. In general, these may sound trivial, but I believe that people really underestimate the impact of sensory elements in allowing an attraction to feel memorable. Finally, I want to wrap things up by just speaking about the general maintenance of the ride. I'm sure you've noticed recently, but the cleanliness of the parks and the maintenance standards of the attractions have definitely taken a back seat. With a new attraction such as Rise of the Resistance, you would think that maintenance would be a top priority, right? Well, let's take a look at a few clips.
Resistance is about to be destroyed. You guys really like cutting it close, don't you? Okay, you're clear. Your escape pods came in a little off target.
If I had waited hours in line, or if I had paid for a lightning lane just to experience this, I would probably be pretty upset that you're almost guaranteed to have any combination of effects not working properly. So, with all this being said, hopefully you can see my perspective on this. Rise of the Resistance is a fine attraction, but it's not the be-all, end-all of innovation as people often claim it to be. Under the shiny novelties that impress the suburbanites who live their mundane, unremarkable lives, is a rather mediocre experience equivalent in value to Harry Potter and the Escape from Gringotts. Even then, so many of these people who have claimed that this ride is the pinnacle of Disney Imagineering have now moved on to make the same claim about Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind, which is essentially just Space Mountain with spinning. So, that's my case that Rise of the Resistance is mediocre and overrated to an annoying degree. If you agree with me, that's cool. If not, at least you understand my perspective now. As always, you can do me a favor by leaving a like on the video, or if you really want to antagonize someone, you can share it with them. If you haven't done so already, I also recommend subscribing and hitting the bell icon so as to be alerted to new videos as they release.